those problems. How have you engaged in a formal remediation agreement with a supervisee? What were the components of that? How did you go about it? If you were like me early in your process, you didn't really know how to be strategic about that because no one really taught you or helped you think about that. How can you determine when formal remediation is needed versus just addressing a problem with a student kind of more casually, right? And that's something we all struggle with, right? Like, is this something that needs to be formally addressed, or is this less formal? And in my experience, I find what we often do is we think, well, this will just go away, or this person will grow from this, or we'll just have a conversation about it and maybe it's enough. And sometimes that is enough. But very often I found myself in situations where we didn't more formally address it. And then I'm like, oh, I wish we had done that before, right? Have you had a situation with a supervisee in which the supervisee would not change and or respond to your feedback? And then how did you handle that situation? What are the consequences for the supervisor if or when we engage or don't engage a supervisee in a remediation process, right? So what are some potential ethical and legal consequences of doing something like that? So these are just a couple of the questions that I know that we all wrestle with, and we don't have time to take a deep dive around all of this, but what we are going to do today is talk to you about our practices, what we do. We've developed a model called professional development plans that we use. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. There's an article that Jake and I wrote associated with this model that is been published in Counselor Ed and Supervision. At the end of the presentation, we're going to send you a PDF of this presentation. We're going to send you a copy of that article that we wrote as well. And we're also going to send you some examples of professional development plans or student remediation plans that we've developed that you are welcome to use, copy and paste and use in any way that you want in your practices with your students and supervisees. So what are some of the examples of issues that prompt remediation? We've dealt with many of these over the years, and I know Dr. Paylo is going to jump in here as well, but these could be things like students disclosing different legal involvement. As an example, I've had a number of students in recent years who have gotten DUIs while they were in our program. So our state licensure board looks at that in Ohio. I know in some states they don't, but they do here. And our students, they have to report that. And so when they tell us about that, we have to think about that. Like, how do we work with them? How do we address that? What does that mean? And what is our responsibility being aware of that to address it? What do we do with it? We've had situations where students have, our community partners, when our students do internships, they do screening, they do drug tests and screening. And so what do you do when they have a dirty test, right? How do you handle that? This is something we've actually gotten a number of times in recent years. And we had a situation where we had a student posting inappropriate pictures on social media. It was wide open, and it came to our attention when he interviewed for an internship site, and they searched him and they saw the inappropriate pictures, right? So what do you do about that? What do you do when the supervisee is getting feedback from their supervisors and they're not responding to it, or they're not addressing it? Or what if they're not following different agency policies? What if they're just, being manipulative? I had a student last year who failed her drug test for her internship. And then she didn't tell me that. Then she came to me and she complained about the site, and she had all of this, like, they're not being supportive, they're not this, they're not that. So she kind of threw the site under the bus. And then I found out later that really what had happened was she didn't pass her test and she didn't want to take responsibility for that. So that felt really manipulative to me. What about when you have students who have serious mental health issues? We've had students who we've become aware, and they've disclosed to us they're struggling with mental health issues, especially now during these difficult times. We're seeing so much of this, right? What about when students have unprofessional or insensitive language that they express about vulnerable populations? Sadly, we've had this come up in class. What about when students are excessively late, maybe to classes, or very commonly we hear about internship situations where there are a lot of absences or they're tardy. We had a situation about maybe 5 years ago where I know this is surreal, but we actually had a situation where a student, an internship, put his hands on and pushed a student, and it was actually caught on video. It was a very strange situation, and I don't know that we necessarily could have really wrapped our heads around it, but we actually saw it on a video that occurred that the student didn't know was there. Very commonly we might see issues where our students or supervisees are struggling with basic micro skills, helping skills, empathy, listening, the ability to connect with clients. This is something we see actually a lot of. Unprofessional communications with internship sites and supervisors. I had a student just a couple weeks ago who was sending these like really terse one-word emails to our community partners around trying to seek an internship. So we had a conversation around how she's presenting and how she could present in a more professional way that would represent her and the program better and build connections, right? Clinical writing skills. This is something we see a lot of our students struggle with their writing skills. We're seeing that increasingly. So what do you do with that? Or maybe not submitting documentation on time or turning paperwork in on time. It might be that students are struggling with developing treatment plans or selecting appropriate clinical interventions. We had a situation once where a student left a session, went to the jail with a client to file a restraining order, like things like this, right? Substance abuse relapse. In our program, we have certain academic requirements. So what if they're not meeting academic requirements? What if they fail the comprehensive exam? We've had this where students continually fail. And then of course the good old, plagiarism and academic dishonesty, right? So this is a lot, and this is just the start. I'm sure you all have stories about situations that you couldn't have imagined that you struggled with. In the professional literature, they talk about this thing we're talking about. They call it different things. Some people talk about it as incompetence, which assumes that you can achieve a level of competence that you may not have. Some people talk about it as impairment. Impairment kind of suggests that you had a level of competence, but now you're impaired and you don't have it. And neither of those things may be true, right? So there's a lot of different words that are used. Just for the purposes of our presentation, we're going to use the term problematic. It's a very generic term, but I think it nicely covers all of these different behaviors that we're going to be talking about. Okay, Matt.
Well, thank you, Vicki. So I would echo exactly what Vicki said. My experience was that I didn't get a lot of experience with talking about how to deal with these types of issues. And so when I was looking at that list, and I don't know if it was the same for Jake and Vicki, but I was remembering just how much time it took, how much digging, how much consulting, how much, figuring out, who needed to get information from, how many meetings, then if there was a plan, constructing a plan, a remediation, moving forward. So there's just a lot of time that goes into that. And so I really kind of felt that as we walked through that process. So, but now probably what most of you are aware of, that, the supervision or supervisory relationship, as well as the education relationship, really requires that when we see these issues, we have to address them in some way. And so, I think we can all agree that some action needs to be provided, but what and how, and that's what we're going to hopefully unfold for you all today as we go through this process. But one of the things that really jumped out to me about this whole process is that there was this desire within the literature and within our accreditations, within our code of conduct, for us to identify and to remediate these types of situations. So Dr. Kress and I have both been on licensure boards where we've had to deal with licensure issues, and there's this sense of remediating an issue with a licensee, but we're finding that with supervisors relationships, as well as these student relationships, that there is a need to remediate because of our role and our position. So we can probably go to the next slide as well. I don't think I can go to, oh, there it goes. So, so you have the code of ACA code of ethics as well. That's a similar type of situation where you also, we have to identify kind of with ongoing feedback, and we have to provide a sense of not only what's going on, but how we're going to help that individual, that supervisee, that student kind of move ahead and remediate the situation. And so I think that at least presents, or at least provides the groundwork that we are called by our code of ethics to intervene, which most of you kind of intuitively could get to. The other thing that I will say is the multicultural competencies on the next slide, and social justice. That when we deal with these types of situations, I think we really, as educators, as supervisors, really need to slow down the process for ourselves, and we really need to take pause. We need to consider our own cultural values, our own beliefs, and our own levels of knowledge and skills, and especially how that can be impacting the encounter that we're having, whether it's a gatekeeping, whether it's a remediation, or whether it's just even just a difficult conversation we're going to have with students. So we have to kind of first look at that. And, Dr. Kress and I have written 2 books together, and we have in our diagnostic process, the I being first, you have to look at yourself. And I think that's really the case here when you're dealing with these remediation or these gatekeeping issues. You have to kind of look at yourself, look at kind of your own kind of cultural competencies and what you're bringing to the encounter. And conversely, then you have to kind of consider where the student or the supervisee is with their own cultural values, beliefs, multicultural awareness, and their own skill set. And I think only by doing that can then we start really kind of understanding some of the complex identities that we have coming to these encounters, why we're looking at privilege and marginalized status, and then these concepts of intersectionality. So I really feel like that this is just kind of a caution, just as you go through these difficult conversations and these remediations, to constantly consider and monitor and assess yourself as well as the student throughout the remediation process. So next slide. So if you're a doc student or you're watching this later on, I think we've really done a really valuable service for you all. You have yourself a really quick kind of literature review on what is going on in remediation these days. And it is, as you can tell, it's a really hot topic. There's a lot going on and a lot of people writing and publishing on these issues because they're really pertinent to supervisors and counselor educators. Any of you who have been in this situation know, if you're anything like me, you start scouring the literature when you start being presented with some of these issues. So I want to highlight just 2, but there's so much here to dig into. But the Brown Rice of 2016, one of the things that article points out is why a lot of supervisors and counselor educators don't intervene. And they don't intervene because of this trying to balance this idea of empathy with this responsibility to gatekeep, trying to balance kind of being the individual who really takes a developmental approach, but then also has to make some evaluative kind of statements on students. So, and I think that what our presentation today gives you, it gives you a means to actually do that through these strength-based conversations. The other article, another article that I would highlight, or at least tell you to maybe look a little deeper, is the Henderson 2018. And this article really goes and takes a look, almost a snapshot at what's going on currently in programs across the countries on what are some of the interventions they're using in these professional development remediation plans. And so they really break up into 4 different areas. And one is this kind of personal counseling, asking individuals to go into personal counseling, to kind of do some of their own work on certain types of issues, as well as sometimes they're asked to, the second level would be repeating or remediation with recourses, having them kind of repeat certain aspects of ethics or even kind of attending skills classes. Another layer would just be kind of imposing some assignment work, some kind of outside, whether it's through continuing education or, whether it's workshops or even kind of reflective assignments. And then finally, it's kind of a catch-all where it's meeting with the supervisor or meeting with a counselor educator or even a faculty member on a regular implemented time that would be in addition to what they would be required to for K-Prep or even their own program. And then the final part that I would say is that the Rose 2020 article, and that article really highlights that a lot of times individuals won't intervene and they think, well, it just kind of will move on, but there's some real impact to individuals' programs as well as those high performing students if they see this going on and faculty and supervisors aren't intervening. So there's kind of some real detriment that can happen to kind of their idea of the field as well as the program. Next slide. So the final thing that I will say before I hand it back over to Dr. Kress is that we really do believe that providing a professional development plan as a remediation tool is a wonderful way to kind of highlight what students are doing well already, highlight the problematic behaviors that really do need to be addressed for their success, as well as giving them kind of good, standardized, individualized kind of plans that highlight due process, that highlight documentation trails, because you want to make sure that a documentation trail is provided in these situations, as well as communicating with all the individuals who need communicated with, including the faculty and site supervisors, as well as the student, and that they're appropriate developmental interventions that really can show students kind of how to be successful in their field, in the field moving forward. So I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Kress.
Okay, so earlier I talked about how we have developed a remediation model that we use that we call professional development plans, or PDPs. It's not brain surgery, and it's a model that's very similar to what is used in the workplace. So like people, human resource people, employers, when they're remediating employee problems, there are certain legal expectations that they have to adhere to and a certain process they go through. So in some ways, this is similar to what you might hear called a professional improvement plan. We prefer to use the word development, of course, because we're counselors. So we like to use the word development and how we communicate what this is. I'm aware that, I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. So I'm aware that we're kind of limited on time. And what I don't want to do is go over this with you in too much detail, because we're going to be sending you the article. We're going to be sending you all kinds of examples of these that you can use and apply. But our hope is that this might be helpful and you might use this or something like this as a template to guide your practices. One of the things that I've always thought, and I have really strong feelings about, and some new research is actually starting to bear this out, is that when we are empowered with a way to move forward with remediation issues, so when we have a plan or a template or a way of thinking about it, we are going to be, as educators and supervisors, much more empowered to actually do that. If you've got this sense, like I did early in my career, of like, oh, this is not good, but I don't know what to do, you just kind of flounder. And I've some of my friends in other programs and other educators I know, they talk about this, like, there's problems, but I just don't know like what to do or which way to go. And then they're so afraid they're going to do something wrong that they don't do anything, right? So that's what we don't want. And we're hoping, again, this can serve as a template for you. Okay, so what are the components of this professional development plan process? Well, first, what is it? Basically, it's a structured process where you give due process to your students or supervisees. And this due process piece is really important. You have to present the issue and concern to them and agree with them on what is the path forward. But you also have to make sure that they have voice in this process, that they can express concerns or they can make modifications to the plan that they think may be necessary. So basically, in some, it's a behavioral remediation process that you're going through collaboratively with your student. And this feels a lot to me like, like Matt and I talk a lot about how important it is in developing treatment plans to be collaborative. And this feels a lot like that to me, like you're engaging them in the discussion, and that's putting a lot of responsibility on them. And also from a relational perspective, it's really relational relationship building, right? Because if you present some, we know this as counselors, if you tell someone, oh, you have to do this, and they don't have any buy-in in that process or any voice in that process, they're going to dismiss it, like, oh, this is just something that I have to do. But the more you can engage them, I think the more helpful this process is. So when to communicate this remediation process, you want to communicate this process to your students, obviously the faculty, and to your community partners. So really everyone involved in your program should be familiar with your remediation process and what that looks like, right? So with our students, we have a student orientation. We talk about professional development plans in our remediation process right out the gates before they even start. During our interviews, even during our counseling interviews, one of the things we ask them is how tell us about a time when you've responded to difficult feedback that was painful or hard for you. Tell us about that. And we say, in our program, we're going to give you a lot of feedback. We want you to grow personally and professionally through our program. Does that feel comfortable for you? Is this what you're signing up for? Because this is something we're going to do. So right out the gates, we're creating this culture of giving feedback, constructive feedback as well as positive feedback. We also communicate our remediation process through our student handbook, in our professional orientation and ethics course, and we also have it listed on our course syllabi. We also, our core faculty, we're all very familiar with our remediation process, but we may, like all of you, we get adjuncts in and out and they may not be familiar with it. So we talk to them about it. We have a part-time faculty manual and handbook that they receive. Again, we have it on all of our syllabi, so our adjuncts are familiar with it. And we also go through a review process. So we review our students. Jay can talk more about this, but I think it's like at 9 hours and then about halfway through the program, and I think then at the end of the program. So all the faculty get together to review. And again, the students know we're doing all of this. It's also important when I'm the internship coordinator, and so when I place students, I talk to our community partners about our student remediation process. I make sure that they know that we want to support them, that we want to get feedback from them if they're concerned a student struggling. We want to know that. And I've gotten feedback from our partners that that's rare, that other schools don't tend to do that. And I think that that's really important, because if you just simply saying that one sentence to your community partners can really help them open the door to feel safe to come to you if they are concerned about a student. And I'm a big believer that it is the most kind thing that you can do is to talk with a student or provide remediation as early as possible. What you don't want is for them to dig themselves deeper into a hole that they cannot get out of, right? You want to talk with them early and soon. Okay, the first step in developing a professional development plan is to identify the problematic behaviors. I think this is important. And again, I've learned this the hard way, like everything in my life, I've learned it the hard way. I don't think it's helpful to sit down with a student and get into like, well, you did this and you did that. And like, why did you do that? It's like, I don't think that that's really helpful. And I put like 0.025% of my energy into that. I just don't think it's really terribly helpful. So when we do our professional development plans, we might have like a sentence or two about what the concern is, but what we're mostly interested in is creating a professional development plan that is strength-based. And I'm also a very humanistic, solution-oriented kind of counselor, and so this is also the approach I use with my clients, is what are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm less interested in what you're not going to do, right? So we try to frame this in a really positive kind of way. Like, so instead of saying like, we don't want you to be late to your internship. We talk about you'll be on time. It's a subtle difference, but I think it matters. And again, I think it goes a little, towards the strength-based perspective, and it helps our students to be less defensive, because we're not saying, look, you're not on time. We're saying we want you to be on time. We're just laying out the behavioral expectations, what we want you to be doing. We want to see that you're responding to your clients with basic micro skills, expressing empathy, using open-ended questions, right? We don't want to talk about what they're not going to do. So you want to kind of figure out like, what are the areas where the student is struggling? Is it attendance, tardiness, micro skills? Has there been ethics issues? We had a student a few years ago who recorded client sessions without going through the recording process. So she didn't have them sign off on that and record it. So that's like an ethics issue, right? A legal and ethics issue. So you want to identify like, what are kind of the overall behavioral domains. So it might be ethics, it might be skills. I mean, you can call it anything that you want, but then you want to develop it using this kind of strength-based language. So, like demonstrate an openness to supervisor feedback, for example. A lot of times, I would say most of the time, by the time a student is on our radar as having an issue, there's a couple different concerns. I mean, we've had as many as like 6 or 7, I think, sometimes. I think over the years, we've gotten better at this, and we've been able to hop in and start to address problems soon enough that I think it's more common now. We might just have a couple different issues that present, but you might find yourself having to lay out multiple behavioral areas on a professional development plan. Some examples of behavioral domains might be like ethics issues, counseling skills, feedback, not accepting feedback, things like this. Okay, the next thing you want to do is document what the supervisee or what you as a program are going to do to address the behavior, and what, most importantly, what the student is going to do to address the behavior. And here again, this is really strength-based, right? Because you're saying, okay, we want to support you, we want to help you. How can we help you? Here are things we think we could do. So, we had a student a couple years ago who was struggling with her micro skills. And, I met with her like 5 extra times. I had her create a tape, go through the tape, identify where she could use particular micro skills. And then we met 5 times over the semester to review her tapes. So it was like, I was putting myself out there and being a partner with her, trying to support her, volunteering my time. And I was also saying to her, like, what are you going to do? How are you going to work with us to help you be successful? There's lots of different remediation activities that you might write into the plan, right? So I was just on a dissertation. It's an incredible, actually it won the ACES Best Dissertation Award. It's called something around, I can't remember the title, but Lena Salvatore, I don't know if you guys know her, she's down in Florida now, but I can actually get you a copy of the article. It's coming out in CES. But she did the most amazing appendix for her dissertation. She went through all the literature and in the whole world. And she identified all these different remediation activities you can get in. So if any of you are interested, reach out to me and I can connect you with her and see if she can share this with you. It's very good research. But there's lots of different things that you can do, right? So you might give a student a writing assignment. So like we like to use these if there's like something that's knowledge-based that's a problem, so like a legal or ethical issue, right? We might say, okay, we want you to write a 5 to 7 page paper talking about taping and recording. And why is it so important to get consent from your client to record? And what are the ins and outs? And how can you go about that, right? Because that's like a knowledge-based thing. Like, I think that she didn't understand how important that was. So that's a, we don't actually do a lot of the writing. Personally, I don't always think it's super helpful, but it can be helpful with knowledge-based kinds of things. You might have them go to counseling, right, and get some kind of an assessment. So like with our substance abuse situations, like if students aren't passing a urine test for drug screening, we can't assess if they have a substance abuse issue or not. That's not our role. We send them out and then we have them get an assessment and we write in that they're going to follow up with the recommendations of that assessment that they get, right? So those are two things we use a lot of. Like there might be situations if a student's demonstrated a behavior that we know they're struggling mentally and emotionally, that we might have them go to counseling. So we'll write in that they have to go to counseling and that we want their counselor to sign off that they're feeling satisfied that the student is fit to see clients or to come back to the program. Part of it might be remediation, might be meeting with us as faculty to work on some different things. It might be meeting with their supervisor for additional supervision sessions. It might be completing some type of continuing education, maybe around a particular ethics topic. We've done that in the past. So really the sky is the limit in terms of what you may or may not have them do. And I think you'll see on what we send you, there's a lot of different approaches. One of the approaches that we've taken is we think it's really important to have a lot of different people involved in this process, right? So we have the student involved and sign off. We give them that due process. You know, you don't have to sign this. You have a right. And we explicitly put right on there, I understand I was not coerced or forced to sign this, right? So they sign off on it, the department chair, the program coordinator. I'm the internship coordinator, so I wind up signing off on a lot of this. If they're in a field placement site, we have a field placement supervisor sign off on it. So we take this approach that it's really good to pull as many people in as is possible. What's really interesting is we have done like hundreds of these, and I can't even remember students ever saying, I'm not signing this. We've never that I can recall. I mean, maybe once or twice, like students may have asked for slight modifications of things or like time extensions, but it's really, this approach is very, I think it really fits for our students and it really fits for us. And we've had really good success with it. I talked about that. Oh, something I didn't mention is this is super important. As part of your PDP process, you want to have timelines. So you want to say, you're going to get your mental health assessment by, November 29th. You're going to get us your assessment by this date, or you're going to complete your ethics training or your paper by, or if they have ongoing counseling, you also want to write in that they're going to give you a signed off sheet, like proof that you're going to counseling, and you're going to turn it in every other week at 5 p.m. by Friday. Right. So you want to help the student be successful, and you also want to cover yourself in terms of legal liability by making sure you're communicating all these expectations really clearly. So here's an example. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over it, and we're going to be sending you a lot of these to take a look at. So, but here's just an example of what this might look like. You can see I understand that I don't have to sign this. I agree to sign it. Okay, here's another one. So you're going to get copies of all of these. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Thanks, Dr. Kress. So I really appreciate the model that Vicki shared and the one that's set up for our program at Youngstown State University. So I want to share a little bit about the types of conversations and how to structure those conversations in a way that hopefully moves the process forward in a beneficial way. There's a quote that I like, and I think it helps frame the process and something that you can consider. The quote is, "When a flower won't bloom in your garden, you enrich the soil, not step on the flower." And so think about that. You're gardening, and a flower not growing. You may have a variety of different plants, flowers, in your garden. If something's not, producing or moving in the correct direction, you just don't rip it out or try to destroy it. You think about what type of soil does that plant need? So every plant or flower may need a different amount of water or a different acidity of the soil. So really thinking about your environment as a counselor education program and the environment of the conversation that you're going to have with a student who's struggling. So think about, how do you enrich the conversation, or how do you enrich the training or the developmental interventions that a particular student needs. So from our perspective, it's important to incorporate those humanistic principles into that process. And so there's a number of those principles. And if you click to the next slide, you'll see those. So unconditional positive regard, empathy, genuineness, transparency in the process, non-punitive supervisor tone, and a non-manipulative supervisor language. Now, sometimes so I'm teaching practice semester, and sometimes my students will say, yeah, I've got those basic skills, and they really want to, try out some of the more complex counseling techniques. But often they think that they're demonstrating those basic skills, but in reality, they're not. And I think as counselor educators, or if you're a doc student or a supervisor in the community, it can be easy to take for granted that we are actually providing unconditional positive regard, and we're actually communicating empathy to our supervisees. We may feel it, and I tell students in prac, you may feel like you have empathy for your client, but if you're not communicating that empathy, if you're not communicating in a way that's genuine, you're not really delivering these techniques. And so, what does that mean? So as a counselor educator or as a supervisor, really using some of those effective statements, statements that communicate expressions of attitudes, values, and feelings. So when I meet, and when Vicki and Matt meet with a student who we're doing a professional development plan, it's important for all of us to provide those honest observations and honest feelings, and really communicate what that honest request is for the student. So being really open, being transparent, just communicating, in a way of what's happening, that you have empathy for that student. I had a situation about 2 weeks ago where a student didn't show up for class, and probably all of us have certain things in our syllabi about class attendance and things like that. And I followed up with a student out of a position of concern, and the student told me that she had driven all the way to Youngstown, and my class is at 8 o'clock, parked in the parking lot, but was, based on certain things happening in her life and with her family, was struggling so badly in that moment that she felt she couldn't get out of the car to walk into the building. And here she drove an hour to get to campus, sat in the parking lot, and then drove home. And I followed up with her, and she's certainly back in class the following week. But as a faculty member, having empathy for what your clients, or not your clients, but what your students are dealing with. And I think of a lot of the social issues that are going on today, and things that are impacting, the experience of a lot of our students. Even during this presentation, there was a court case where there was a verdict reached, and probably most of us got those little dings on our cell phone while we're sitting in this presentation. And so a number of our students can be impacted by that. And so being able to communicate that empathy for our students is important. So it's the process that Vicki had talked about, but then there's also the delivery of that. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see some practical things that we would encourage you to do. So the first one is strengthening that supervisor-supervisee relationship. Thinking back to your basic counseling skills, having that open and relaxed body language, checking your own tone. You may be very frustrated that the student plagiarized, or you may be very frustrated that the student can't pass comps, or that the student, you know, was being deceptive or doing something that was inconsistent with the behaviors that you would expect as a counselor educator or supervisor. But being able to communicate, you know, in a tone that you care for the student and you want them to be successful is important. Giving them silence and space to be able to be heard, encouraging the supervisee to discuss the situation. Again, some of those affective questions. What happened? What were you thinking? What do you think now? You know, even who was hurt by what you did? And what do you think needs to happen now? So really good open-ended questions to see the perspective from the student. It's important to encourage supervisee insight about the issue. You know, oftentimes I may provide my perspective that this problematic issue really relates to a larger issue that the student may be having problems with throughout the program. You can highlight some of those discrepancies between what a student wants or supervisee wants, which is to graduate from a program, get licensed, and what they're doing right now, which is not leading them in that direction. And then encouraging the supervisee to take action and change. So Vicki had mentioned, it's not necessarily what we don't want you to do, but what are the things, what are the agreed upon goals that will help you engage in behaviors that are ultimately going to help you reach your goal, which is to graduate from the program. And how will those activities be completed and then reported back to the supervisor, the program director? So in my role at YSU, oftentimes, you know, if a student has to report that they're participating in counseling or they're receiving some type of an assessment, oftentimes that's going to come back to me. And so even, I know we have some program directors in this Zoom call. So even for you, or if you're doing it as a faculty member, you've got to set up your own system for tracking when that information is coming back and when a student completes their PDP. So, you know, it's not a process where they just get a PDP and then it resolves quickly. There's a lot of work that goes into constructing it, having that conversation, kind of setting the environment, and then following up on the process. If you go to the next slide. So the remediation conversation process, you know, oftentimes, so I'll communicate with Vicki or Matt and I would have those conversations because in the beginning, Vicki had mentioned that, you know, sometimes you might question, do I need to go through this entire process, or is there more of a natural consequence that the student may need to receive? And so even just deciding what level to move forward, you know, it's important to consult and not be, you know, operate just alone. I would always say it's so important, if possible, to meet in person with a supervisor or with a student rather than over the phone or online. There's so much that's missed. And I know going through, you know, COVID times, we're so used to emailing back and forth or doing something through Zoom, but if possible, meet in person. And I think that can help build the relationship, and also think about the environment when you're meeting with a student, the environment of your office or the location in your building. You know, does it feel like a place that's supportive, that a student wants to be, or does it feel punitive? Again, learn about the supervisee or student subjective perception of the problematic issue, talk about different possible outcomes. I always have a draft outline of a PDP, identifying those issues. But as the kid mentioned, oftentimes we don't stick to it. So I may have kind of a preconceived notion of where this is going, but through that conversation with a student, I'm open certainly to changing the type of remediation activities. And yeah, so being willing to adjust and co-construct that remediation plan. And then the next slide. Let's see. And so finally, kind of thinking about that conversation, recognizing, respecting, and affirming the diversity of the supervisee. And so Dr. Paylo, Matt talked about cultural competence. So it's important to consider your own privilege in a position. Also consider, the space and where a student's coming from and what they may need or what they may not have in this moment. And being able to kind of consider how those cultural perspectives intersect with the identified issue. And you're looking at it from a faculty member or supervisor from your perspective, but being able to think outside of your lens. Seek to understand what the supervisee or student would believe would be fair to help them remediate their behavior. Consider having a colleague meet with you in that process. I think that's really important. And also consider mutually growth fostering interactions. And so just wrapping up this section, from my perspective, it's not my position to, just look at how I can, catch a student who's doing something wrong, or blame a student for something that they didn't do right. But our goal should be that every student admitted to our program is able to succeed, and students need to be taught or have some development into exhibiting those behaviors that are expected. And so, perspective, kind of a takeaway perspective, is to assume the positive of each of your students, have compassion for each of your students, and believe that that they want to learn, and then use this intervention to help bridge that gap.
Okay, thanks, Jake. I'm aware of the time, and I know we're like, we're kind of there. So we just have a couple questions for you to think about. So I'm just gonna, let's see. I wanted to share our email information with you. So you can see our email addresses here. And I just reached out to Lena, and she's going to circle back to me and share, hopefully she'll be able to share her journal article as well as that list of remediation tasks, which I think is so wonderful, such a gift to the profession. So what we'll do is we'll just send you everything in one email. But if you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us individually or collectively, or if there's anything we can do to support you. I know I can speak for all of us that we actually enjoy this. We actually think it's a fun conversation to have, and we really like being a part of it. So I don't want to keep, I know some of you have clients scheduled. I don't want to keep you any longer than two. So we'll stay on the call for a few minutes if you want to stay and have questions and connect. And again, I'd like to encourage all of you to go to the NCACES website and take a look at the other webinars that we're offering. We offer these as just a member benefit to you. Look, you're paying money to be a part of this, and we want to thank you for that. And it's just something small that we can do. So we hope that you'll consider attending them, and maybe even in the future presenting one. So thank you again to all of you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So for the question on the chat box, just in case anyone else has the same question. So the link should be emailed to you by not me, but our, oh my God, I can't remember what the title is, but basically CEU person, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Shelly, our CE person, should be sending you a link. So if you don't get it for some reason, reach out to me and I'll connect you with her. Give her a few days though. I give her a few days to get that to you.
Does anyone have any specific questions about a situation that you're dealing with? You want some feedback?
Hello, my name is Christine, and I just wanted, it's not a question as much as it is just an observation. I have had to walk through several remediation plans with students, and one of the things that I've noticed is that any time where it becomes very intense, it's so important to have a second person in the room when walking through the plan. So I really appreciate the strength-based and developmental nature of what you presented, but it's something that I learned the hard way, and I'm really grateful that it only happened once. And just as a tidbit of information to anybody else that's out there.
Yes, Christine, I'm so glad you said that. That's our policy as well. We should have said that. We always, every step of the way, we always have someone else in the room. And I think it's good to not have too many people, because then that can get really intimidating. But we always have at least one other person there in the room, so that it can be very. We haven't had a bad experience with that, but I think we've always had two people, right, guys?
I think it's also good, not just from a perspective of protecting yourself or having a he said, she said. But I think having another person can also help you check your own perspective. And so certainly if I've met with a student, I'm seeing it from a certain perspective. Having Vicky also there, you know, she may be able to pick up, or Matt, be able to pick up something that I'm missing. Or even maybe I'm being, I don't know, a little bit too pushing maybe an issue that needs to then back off of, and having another faculty member who can also listen. I think it's just really important, I think, to have the best outcome for that student.
I think getting this message to, like, look, what we both are, we want to support you, we want to help you win, we want you to help you be your best, and this is an attempt to help you be successful, because we don't want you to go on this path and have more problems. We want you to go on this path and win. So hearing that from two different faculties too, I think can be helpful.
It looks like you guys have a messages in the chat. The first one says, do you guys have any experience of students involved in the court system regarding their problematic behavior, and how does this hold up with the courts?
Thankfully, we've not had that yet. For better or worse, we've not had that, and maybe that's a good sign, right? That we haven't. And we've also never had it that someone's refused to do it, and like, I don't know what that looks like. I don't want to know. But thankfully, we've not had it go out of our area. Like we've had it be pretty successful.
Then the following one goes along. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Let me just jump in. So we also mentioned that we don't force a student to sign PDP. You know, a student could just choose not to, and that's okay. But oftentimes the PDP can be used as an intervention when a student would naturally be kicked out of or removed from the program. So our program policy is that if a student receives 2 or more C's in the program, they're removed from the program. And we just had this maybe a year ago. And so the natural consequence in that situation would be for the student to be removed from the program, and they would, wouldn't be in the program. So there was a situation happening in the student's life, and it didn't seem appropriate for a student. We thought that the student should have an opportunity to continue, even though based on the policy, they should be removed from the program. So we initiated a professional development plan that gave the student some remediation and maybe some structure that will help the student get back on track. And so it wasn't like we did a PDP and then the students challenging it. It was that there was going to be a natural consequence in the PDP, and it intervened to help hopefully the student get back on the track, and the student, the student's doing fine now.
I see there's one more question too. Do PDPs ever stretch across 2 semesters? And if so, how do you manage the handoff when faculty or supervisors change? Yeah, we've certainly had PDPs that have extended or crossed semesters depending on timelines and things. And I think this is one of the places where having multiple people involved can be helpful. Like our students keep the same supervisor, but if they had a new supervisor and they had a PDP, I think we would want to pull the new supervisor in and have them take a look at that and sign off as well. I can't think of a specific, do you guys want to add anything to that?
I just want to say, when I left YSU, I talked a lot with Jake about the handoff. I mean, I think it's just, it's something natural that we've done, I think, a really good job with regard to faculty, site supervisors, always kind of keeping the conversation open about kind of what outstanding professional development issues we still have open. And so we can kind of make faculty aware of that so they can kind of continue to provide feedback as well. So.
Yeah, our model has been the program director has been kind of the keeper of the professional development plans, even though there's a number of different faculty or supervisors involved. And so Matt served as our counseling program director, and he had a big folder of all those PDPs. And then when he transitioned on to Concordia, and then I moved into the role of program director. It was important for me to meet with Matt and to get updated on which PDPs are completed, which ones are in progress, and then how do we kind of, how do we make sure that this doesn't get lost in the process? When a PDP is developed, it's then sent, even though it might be something that Vicky's involved in or I'm involved in, our process is that it's sent out to all of our faculty. Now, all of the rest are all of our full-time core faculty. Now, the rest of our faculty aren't necessarily involved in constructing it because it's been constructed and it wasn't really important for them necessarily for them to be in the process. But part of that is making sure that all of our faculty understand, what's happening with our students. And certainly we could have a faculty member read that and then come back to whoever was involved and maybe voice their own opinion regarding things that may need to be adjusted. So I see it as a further check on the perception of the individuals who were involved in constructing that for the student. Oh, and the other thing that I'll mention, this goes back to the question about stretching across 2 semesters. So one of the things that we've written into our PDPs is that if a student, let's say, for example, a student is being removed from an internship site or a practicum site because it's just not a fit, supervisor is saying, I'm not going to supervise this student. Within the PDP, it's written that the student will share with the new supervisor information about their remediation plan, which I think is a good thing to do. So it gets to the question, Linda's question about the handoff. Can avoid a student having a situation with one supervisor and then the new supervisor is blindsided by some issue that's arising. So and the student agrees to it, and so I thought that was a good suggestion.
Sorry, my dogs decided they're like, hey mom, it's 2. You said you were going to be done. So they're scratching at the door. Sorry about that. It has to be interesting. Bee is a recent graduate of our program. It has to be interesting for you to hear this other side, because this is something you probably don't think too much about. But one of the things Jake and I have talked about is there's some interesting research that's oh, sorry, my whole pack of dogs is coming in. That there's this interesting research that students get discouraged when they're often more aware of other students' problems than we are. Right? And then they get discouraged when they see things going on, and then they think the faculty aren't addressing it or the faculty doesn't address it. And it really sends kind of a dangerous message to them. Like we're saying to them, oh, be ethical and accountable, but then we're not always doing that. So it's one of the things I also like about this, that our students know that we're going to be on top of this and we're coming from a supported place.
Yeah, before I go, I will say that's definitely been an interesting perspective to kind of see behind, how you guys were, basically running the program the entire time I was in it. But it was really good to know. And I know that all of us felt really supported all the time by you guys. Of course, we're closer to each other than, typically the professors, because we don't want to, come off a certain way. But I will say that a lot of the times you guys were on top of it before it ever got to a point where we were like, hey, what the heck's going on here? Why isn't anybody doing anything? So I've always, my Kent State cohort probably hates me because all I do is talk about how YSU did this and that and how great they were. So if that makes you guys feel better about it, I guess. So yeah, I thank you guys so much for your presentation. Like I said in my chat, this is going to be really helpful for me, and it's good to see how you guys were doing stuff, because I know that I always talk about how helpful and beneficial it was for me as a student.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here. Just reach out if you have any questions, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. We're skipping December, but we'll be back in the saddle in January. So we hope to see you there. Bye guys, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Thanks, B.